Hey, this is Cedric Youngelman, your host of the Bitcoin Matrix podcast. Thank you so much for checking out my show, where we have philosophical conversations about Bitcoin and the future of money. Please make sure that you're subscribed to the show. And if you're watching this on YouTube, like the video so that more people see it and hit that notifications button so that you don't miss out on any new content. I'm able to produce this show thanks to my sponsors, and I'm very selective about who I work with and put in front of my listeners. So I hope that you will check them out and support them. I'm also able to produce the show thanks to the support of my listeners and viewers, value for value style. So thank you for streaming and boosting the show for Sats on the Fountain app. This episode with Jeff Booth on finding signal in a noisy world is brought to you by River Financial. Securely buy Bitcoin and purchase hosted mining rigs at river.com. I've been using River for over 2 years now because they have incredible customer service, zero fees on recurring orders, and they will help you unlock the possibilities of this revolutionary digital asset. To get started and find out for yourself, use the link in the show notes and get up to $10,000 free when you buy Bitcoin and miners at river.com. CoinKite is a leader in security and hardware manufacturer, established block 141,000, maker of some of the most iconic Bitcoin products, such as OpenDime, Cold Card, Block Clock, Sats Card, Tap Signer, and Sats Chip. For 5% off, use the referral link in the show notes. Recently, I decided to partner with CrowdHealth to help fix the healthcare system. You're challenging the traditional status quo. Then why are you still paying expensive insurance premiums? Experience the freedom and affordability of cash payments and community-funded healthcare with CrowdHealth. Use promo code MATRIX during signup for a special discounted subscription offer. Check out the link in the show notes for more information. And now, let's enter the Bitcoin Matrix with Jeff Booth.
What is real? How do you define real?
You can't jump into cash. Cash is trash. What do? You get out.
Jeff Booth is a visionary leader who has lived at the forefront of technology change for 20 years. He led Build Direct, a technology company that aimed to simplify the building industry for nearly 2 decades through the dot-com meltdown, to 2008 financial crisis and many waves of technological disruption. Jeff has been featured in Forbes, TechCrunch, Inc.com, The Globe and Mail, BNN, Fast Company, Entrepreneur, Bloomberg, Time, and The Wall Street Journal. In 2015, he was named BC Technology Industries Association's Person of the Year, and in 2016, Goldman Sachs named him among its 100 most intriguing entrepreneurs. He is a founding partner of Audio Labs, co-founder of AddieInvest.com and Knock Knock, and serves on the boards of Terramera, Cubic Farms, Llama Zoo, Cynthium, and the Richmond Hospital Foundation, as well as numerous advisory boards. In his downtime, Jeff can be found at the lake playing his guitar around a campfire with his family and friends, enjoying water sports and skiing at local Vancouver mountains. He is also dedicated to learning and reads about 50 books a year. Jeff Booth, welcome back to the Bitcoin Matrix podcast. How are you?
I am great. Thanks for having me. A lot has changed from that intro. Thanks for doing that. But different boards now, different started Ego Death Capital. A bunch has changed, but really nice to be here.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I didn't get to update it too much. I grabbed one off your some website, but I think it kind of gives a flavor of sort of your journey and some of the things that you've been involved in. And I got to see each other in Miami, I think at the Swan Dome. That was a year and a half ago or something like that. And a little closer to now in Austin, we shared an Uber after one of the satellite parties in BitBlock Boom. And 2 years ago, you were on this show, episode 27, Bitcoin is a forcing function in the age of inflation. And I'd love to hear from you. I mean, what has the last 2 years been like, both, I guess, personally and professionally with Ego Death Capital and Bitcoin?
Probably largely the same. I think the entire premise that I laid out in Price Tomorrow, it's unfortunately coming true, right? And it's just accelerating. And that means as well, Bitcoin and the adoption of Bitcoin is accelerating as well as it becomes a transmission mechanism to the other side. And probably the biggest change through that last 2 years, I've loved this adventure. I've loved everyone I've met. This community is just absolutely incredible. But the biggest change personally is I decided, and that's why I started Ego Death. I just decided I want to spend more time creating the world that I want to see rather than talking about the world that exists today. And so I wanted to bet my time on the entrepreneurs and the people building the future. So that's why we started Ego Death, and that's why I'm spending more time in the Bitcoin ecosystem, because I'm just having the time of my life there.
Yeah. Maybe how'd you come up with the name Ego Death?
It wasn't me. It was Andy and Nico, my partners, that just thought it described what we're trying to do in this, and it describes the type of world that's created from the Bitcoin ecosystem, and so it was great. It was great, but I didn't come up with it.
Yeah, it's a great name. What is creative destruction? What is that process like?
That's a term from Schumpeter that essentially describes the way every modern economy functions. And it functions from upstart companies using typically new technology or new innovation or new way of doing business to develop a value for people, and that typically does not come from the company that holds the monopoly today. It comes from outside, and the destruction of that the creative value that is gained from that destroys an existing monopoly or company as more people move to the new from the old. So
Right.
that process describes how an economy is supposed to work.
Sure. And why might preventing that failure make things much worse?
Because by preventing that failure, you're essentially locking in the monopoly to make decisions, and you're changing the rules of capitalism by essentially creating crony capitalism and protecting the people that are closest to the monetary spigot. And you tell yourself all the reason I need to do this, otherwise there's a cascading failure. I need to do this for those other people. But once you do it, once you've done that, you've encoded a new set of rules into society that says if you get too big, and you become a systemic risk on the entire economy, then we will socialize the losses when you fail, and we'll bail you out with taxpayer money to be able to keep you in control. And once you've done that, it's not capitalism anymore. It's not creative destruction anymore. It's cronyism, and it sends a signal to the entire market that that's okay. And so then everybody tries to get bigger and bigger and bigger and live on the government money, because they know if they do, government will bail them out.
Right. So you wrote, in other words, changing actors in the system would produce more of the same results and very little real change. Worse still, when much of society believes that changing actors can fix the system, society becomes more divided, while only serving to perpetuate the status quo. Do you think that politics and taxes are a bit of theater in terms?
Complete theater. I wish I didn't have to say that, but unfortunately, it is true, because you don't have a vote, and you might have a vote in taxes, because you could vote for somebody who says it's less taxes or more taxes. But more of the money that the government generates today isn't from taxes. Most of it is from inflation. You don't have a vote in inflation. And so if you don't have a vote, of how fast your money is losing money because of manipulation. And that is responsible for most of the world you live in. Does your vote count at all? Right? And it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter what side of the aisle you're on. That's why I said changing actors in the system. The system requires that manipulation of money to stay solvent, because if it didn't have that manipulation of money, the system is based on credit, and unless the credit keeps expanding at an exponential rate, then the entire credit unwinds, and that is the system we live in. So we can tell ourselves all day long we have to, and we have to protect all of those people that would starve without it, but it is still encoding theft into the base layer. And then if you just looked at if people believed that it was about taxes and it was really about rate of theft, then what would the emergent complex society on top of that look like? Wouldn't the people that were best at manipulating you rise to the top? And that's and unfortunately that's what happens. And that's why when you pull back the curtain and look at the way the world is constructed today, that's the way the world's constructed today. And so the mere reflection of that constructed world is the mere reflection of what we see in the world today, and it has to get worse.
Do you think some amount of time ago, 20 or 30 years ago, that we had a chance at maybe doing things differently, that there could have been a pivot?
I used to think so. And I would say the pivot would have been less harsh 20 or 30 years ago, but the truth is there was no Bitcoin. So, and there need to be a neutral reserve currency for the world that was outside of manipulation. And because of the power that comes with that manipulation, it would be hard to see anybody giving up on that manipulation willingly. So, well, I used to think that was possible. Actually, if I look at the math and why this happens throughout time, it wasn't possible. And that was you need a transmission mechanism to this new system. You actually need creative destruction at money, which is what's happening right now. And if you pull that veil back further, I actually think so. So what's happening? Technology has always been deflationary. Right. Or here's a better way of saying this. The things we sit on top of the great people who went before us, and they teach us lessons, right? And we solve problems on top of that layer, and we get better and better and better at it. So all of the world's knowledge that is moving faster and faster and faster, we sit on top of that knowledge and we get better, and we error correct on that knowledge. And now it's that computers do the same thing. It's moving at a faster and faster rate. And that means that free market has always been taking prices down throughout time. As we came together and started to trade, we would get better and better at that. And if you take a long look at history and monetary systems, but because money could always be corrupted, our history says if a money could be manipulated for some people's gain against other person's loss, it will be. Not it might be, it will be. And so, and I think that's the same reason why, but it's easy to believe we can get a free lunch. Society will vote for, because they don't see that 2% inflation is 2% wage deflation. They don't see that somebody's coming in at 2% and stealing 2% of your stuff each year out of your house, but you don't notice it because it's only 2%. You don't notice it until it gets to 8 or 10%. The same thing happens throughout time. And what started small had to get coin clipping. It got bigger and bigger and bigger, and it caused the same pain on society. And then society rises up and overthrows the leaders. or you go to war and you create new society, new rules, and we promise we won't manipulate again, back to hard money, and then over time you manipulate again. And there was no human way out of that, because we always vote for the short-term incentives. We always look for those short-term. So it's hidden from us, and it looks good in the beginning, and it ends up in tears in the end. And so that means if the brilliance of Satoshi and what's created with Bitcoin is a discovery, innovation, invention, that is the first time in history that we could remove trust from organizations because of decentralization and security, and we could put that trust in all of our hands instead of an organization, then that also must mean that our entire history looking backwards has the error codes of effectively the winner writes the rule book, or writes what history looked like. And the winner is determined by who either won the war or manipulated money the more. And you wouldn't actually see what was actually really happening. What I think is actually happening throughout history is that technology is trying to drive prices down, and inflationary monetary policy tries to drive them up. And when technology moved slower, currencies broke every 600 years, and then technologies moved faster and faster throughout time, and the US dollar failed in 1971, about 50 years, right? Or less than 50 years, and then you created the oil dollar, petrodollar system, which is failing now at about 50 years. And could that go on for some time? It will go on for some time. Doesn't die overnight. But the rate of failure of currencies, the rate of failure of how much manipulation is needed in currencies to pretend they're solvent, has to go up against because technology is trying to go the exact opposite direction. The faster technology moves, the more manipulation is needed in the currency to be able to pretend it's solvent.
Right. There's a lot there I'd like to get into around technology, ideas. Particularly though, we talk a lot about prices. Wages doesn't come up. How are wages sticky up and down?
So wages are sticky. Why inflation works is because the Cantillon effect, and it starts at the top, and by the time it reaches the bottom, people don't notice, and they don't ask for the wage. They might ask for a wage increase each year, and that's not keeping up with the inflation. So wages are sticky on and that's actually why it becomes inflation is wage deflation, or if you had money in the bank, savings deflation. So your money is losing money at a rate, and your wages are losing money at that same rate. That's why it works. Essentially, you're paying back unrepayable debt in cheaper dollars tomorrow, and that's what allows the system to stay solvent. Because if you had to pay back the debt, it's not repayable. So you can only pay it back by manipulating money, manipulating wages down to be able to do that and drive inflation. And so wages just are sticky because people don't demand. They don't know what's happening. It's such a hidden theft from society that they don't know how much money how their dollar is losing money each year, and so they don't ask for the raise because it's so subtle.
Right. Here's
a really important maybe proof point to that, because it's so hard to see. When I was 16, I made $20 an hour as a lifeguard. My 16-year-old son this summer made $16 an hour as a lifeguard. That $20 an hour lifeguard job is an equivalent of about $60 an hour today. And my 16-year-old son makes less in nominal terms than I made then. So what would it look like to a 16-year-old that was looking at house prices and everything else and trying to save in $16 an hour terms to be able to keep up to this society. Now, he's my son, so he knows all of this. But what if he wasn't? Would it be easy for that person to believe it's those evil monopoly business people, or and the government can save me from this, and I'm gonna stop working. I'm just fuck it. I'm done. I'm going to wait till the government pays me. And so you can see what happens to human incentives when you design a system around theft. You have to rely on more, and there's a whole bunch of people in that camp that actually believe the same thing that's hurting them, that's destroying their lives, is the government helping them. And so they turn to more of it. They turn to they end up turning and asking for more of it. And you break the bonds that drive society, because it all turns into a centralized control structure that somebody at the top that is ability to manipulate money is controlling all the strings.
Right. And those are powerful strings. I also think of lying or omission as theft, or, if you don't have that information, you can't make a good decision, or your best possible decision, if someone were to lie or to omit details to you on purpose or something like that. And so I think about sort of my youth and how many decisions I made because of economics, like putting off home ownership or starting a family. And I think of that as a form of time theft in a way.
It is, and these are harsh words. Like when you say theft, it's a harsh word. And so in my article, I wrote misinformation, but the truth is, it is theft. The reason I don't use theft broadly everywhere is because when you do, there's a whole bunch of people within the system that have no idea how the system operates. And a lot of times these things that are so counter to how the system operates pushes those people closer to the system that operate. It's such a stretch for them that and they're hurting so much. They're easily captured by the system because of that pain.
Yeah, I think it's hard for a lot of people to see through these mechanisms or these systemic incentives. Is thinking about things that are hard to see, like Bitcoin, though. Is it true that you saw the iPhone a few years before it came out?
No, I didn't. What I've said is and I've said this on a couple podcasts. If you can't predict your changes in ideas, so in a creative destruction, until something's there for you that delivers better value, you have no idea how all of your ideas that you formerly had are thrown out the window, and you use the new thing because it delivers more value. If I use that example on myself, even though I've been in technology my whole life, I'm pretty good at seeing the future and what's happening in technology. I would have guaranteed to every friend that I would use a BlackBerry forever. I loved the thing. It had buttons that I loved, and when the iPhone came out, gone. And it's almost like I wasn't the same person. I always knew I would use the iPhone, and all of those ideas just changed overnight. Something gave me way better value with all the App Store and everything else that it gave me better value. And I couldn't see the 3-5 years that was in development before it reached me. And so if I couldn't see how my mind would change in an instant of being delivered something new, and I couldn't see inside the company, call it 3 years of development before it was released, then how the hell could any central organization see all changes in a market and all reactions to the changes in the market? And what you realize is it can't. And that's why a centrally controlled structure is impossible to increase living standards over time. It's impossible for them to see it. So if they're actually choosing who wins and who loses, or if they're choosing who wins, they're also choosing who loses without even knowing it.
Right. It's really fascinating. and especially these hard things to see, especially general purpose technology. Why are open decentralized protocols so hard to understand?
Because each layer comes comes one at a time, and the layer has to sufficiently harden to be robust enough to be to build the next layer on top of. And you can't see what's available on the next layer until the next layer is there. So similar example to that iPhone. I couldn't see the iPhone until it was in front of me. And if you just take a look at Bitcoin and on the base layer, you have a decentralized secure platform that is hardened for 13 years and proven itself that nothing is going to stop it as a base layer. But to harden, it had to do 5 to 7 transactions a second, and it had to stay there. And by limiting block size, and the design of that protocol layer had to be a way to prevent the manipulation of money. And if you think about the existing market that we live in, it's 10,000 times bigger than Bitcoin, 4 orders of magnitude bigger than Bitcoin. It's 10,000 times bigger, and all of the power that comes with that, it would have to protect itself against all of that power trying to kill it. Every actor, every global actor, every government, every single thing in the world coming at it, it would have to protect it by something that is so much bigger and so much more thoughtfully powerful because of money. It would have to prove itself against all of that onslaught, which it's done for 13 years, and it's more decentralized today, more secure today, and continuing to happen. Now, that's layer one of Bitcoin. And when people conflate layer 1 and 2 together, or they say, or I'm going to take this a different direction. It also had to protect against, because it only did 5 to 7 transactions a second on the base layer, it also had to compete against every other altcoin saying we can solve scalability and ours is faster, right? And ours is better, and Bitcoin's old tech. And it had to survive against all of that nonsense, right? To be able to actually function as a base layer to build the next layer. But we don't typically see what's available to us until the next layer is there. And if you just looked at TCP/IP and developed by DARPA in the late 60s, it wasn't until HTTP on layer 4, and you could argue which layer this is, but layer 4 that opened up the World Wide Web in 1989. Tim Berners-Lee. Now, 1968 to 1989 and hardening of layers is a long time to get to 1989. And then think about all of what we use today in the technology stack that is on top of that stack. Same technology stack today, largely the same technology stack. And if you had asked anybody in 1989 what we'd be doing today with that technology stack, they would have laughed, right? Most people in 1989 couldn't see even what that would give rise to, even when this whole stack was there. So where are we in this? Lightning as a second layer, or Liquid, or a bunch of second layer type solutions are now entering on top of layer 1 and opening up more ability to do things. Now transfer value, and not 5 to 7 transactions a second, unlimited really around the world, on top of something that's decentralized and secure. Every 10 minutes it comes down. So that opens up more functionality on top, that if you were looking backwards in Bitcoin and you thought it was just the base layer, you would still be confused, because you wouldn't see what's coming on top of it. You would still be comparing what you thought was old tech when it was really a protocol layer with a company, and you would be easily confused to a whole bunch of other non-registered securities or companies that were trying to extract value from you because you misinterpreted a protocol design rather than a company. So when you see protocols are really hard to understand, largely because they come and they harden over time, and you can't see what's available to the next layer until the next layer is developed, and the entrepreneurs now start developing on top of that layer.
Now, we've kind of discussed how money is information, and there's some misinformation in the system. What is happening to trust in the system?
And I wrote that piece called Finding Signal in a Noisy World. In that, I said, I made the case that money is only information, only describes the trade that we have all over the world. And if money wasn't just information, then the Venezuelan bolivar would be equal to a US dollar, right? Or any other Turkish lira would be equal to a US dollar. So we know it's just information. Otherwise, you would want the same unit everywhere. So it's information describing what you really want. What you really want is the the ledger. You believe, here's how much money or information, or here's what I have, my ledger of what I have, and here's what I need to get to what I desire. That's really what it's just describing. Your own, what does it take for you to get the things you desire or need, and that what you want, it gets conflated a lot because of the things you think you need versus what you because of what society tells you, and kind of keep up with the Joneses. And some people say, I only matter, right, when I have this much money, because then I can tell everybody how much money I have. And so what they're really doing is chasing a feeling of mattering, or through money, and measuring against other people in the world. But really, money is just it's information. It describes what you want. So it makes sense that if underneath money, you allowed manipulation of money, then what you actually have is manipulation of information. And it would make sense that everybody looking through that manipulation of information, everyone, and you could argue you and I too, would be saying, no, I have perfect information. It's all of those other people that are looking through misinformation. And what you see throughout society is largely that. Oh, misinformation bubbles everywhere because it has to exist, because money is being manipulated at an outstanding rate. And so you have to have misinformation in society at an outstanding rate. And virtually nobody is, you find this all the time, these little narrow pockets of, oh, you're right, I read this on MSN, is just the carrying function of that manipulation. And it has to look like that. So there is no way out of that misinformation from a system that requires the misinformation to survive.
Right. So in this environment, and it seems kind of apparent, but why, or how do you explain sort of the rise of DeFi and Web3 and altcoins, ICOs, metaverse?
And this is the thing, I that's why I wrote the article in the first place. It's so predictable, because you have a whole bunch of people that saw a rise of Bitcoin, and you saw, and that was a unique first time in history type of asset that had to be designed that way to protect it. And then that would obviously create a market when people are trying to gain more money to escape a system that is devaluing their money, and they're trying to make more of it, and making the whole thing stronger, because really what they're trying to do is escape. They want enough money, and now they see this other thing that said, oh wow, if I just tell somebody I have the new thing, I can create a whole bunch of money over here, and people will believe that. And actually, there's probably many people within that system, entrepreneurs and the like inside that system, that actually believed it themselves. got deluded into believing it themselves as well. So I've said this multiple times, but decentralized finance on top of a centralized platform is ludicrous. It just, so when I see the entire ecosystem now, I'm not saying I'm smarter than people in this, but I never bought an altcoin. I never looked at any of it, because to understand the system dynamics and what would happen, I wanted to go down to the sand and understand this at why the long term, very, very long term, why this was a good bet for my time. And so, and I didn't, and maybe that's another, I didn't need the money. I wasn't, so I was more curious on what what would happen here. So I had an open mind on the system. So people that go through that phase, I understand some people have to learn the hard way to be able to get to this. I just didn't, because I wanted to collect the data. I just really wanted to look at, I wanted to understand for myself. So that don't trust, verify means a lot to me, kind of, because that's what I did on the way through.
It's interesting when you say need the money. I think of that though as a vector. And I think the people that need the money most in this paradigm are getting driven to gamble the most.
Well, that's what ends up happening.
Yeah. And it's just the paradox and the irony of because we know most people trade almost anything, without sort of mentorship and a track record and experience, get wrecked.
And just because of human biases, and kind of an authority bias. If somebody looks like, okay, you see somebody with all the things you want, it's very easy for people to not look at the person through that, but look at, okay, I can do the same thing as them and create the same shortcuts, without understanding that person inside is not the same person you think they are. That person inside might be hollow shell of themselves, trying to get satisfaction or love and connection by having the most money, and by having the most money, they're actually pushing away the thing they want the most. But it's very easy for society, especially if you don't have something and you look at somebody else, to default to that authority bias because you think that they're smarter than you. And it's not true. We do it. It's a known human bias. And it's normal for people to default to authority.
Yeah. I kind of want to get to the blockchain dilemma. And maybe you could kind of explain this, or the blockchain trilemma. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
The blockchain trilemma. And maybe you could explain this a bit, decentralization versus security and scalability.
Yeah, and we're bouncing around a little bit on this because but blockchain trilemma, and actually I think Vitalik came up with it, which is the irony. and maybe he came up with it as a way to sell what he wanted to do, and maybe he came up with it as a way to sell Ethereum because he didn't understand how technology is built in layers. Right, exactly the same. But either way, I think it was him that came up with it. And so the blockchain trilemma is, and you can solve two of three sides of a blockchain: scalability, decentralization, security, and scalability. And so if you just take all of these blockchains and compare them each and pros and cons, if you're just open on that and you say, okay, what would these look like, then Bitcoin is provable today, the most decentralized, most secure blockchain, right? Most hashing power, protecting the network, nodes everywhere, protecting the network, and that design of it keeps it that. So more secure today, more decentralized today, and nothing can stop that, right? So if that was now let's just go through the different ways that you would try to attack that if you were a new entrepreneur. So you had this thing monetize from 0 to, call it 60,000 in its peak, but creating a lot of value for people that were in early. And so there would naturally be, especially in a system there would be naturally a whole bunch of money to be made by saying I could create the new one, right? Something new. So let's just go through the types of new ones and what would happen on that. So let's use, so you could, because this is open source technology, and it's open to anybody to cut over, and you could create new rules tomorrow on a new blockchain and cut it over, i.e. Dogecoin. And so let's use that one for an example. So the next one, if you did the exact same thing as Bitcoin, so you had the same utility, but you started later, then by very nature, you have less security and less decentralization on a copy. Is that fair? And the same utility, exact same utility, less decentralization, less security. So the questions would say, why would anybody use something that was less decentralized, less secure, unless they were just trying to make money that had the same utility as Bitcoin? And you can see, okay, that's a logical, those all fail, as it concentrates into the most decentralized, more secure. So now let's use, okay, this is decentralized and secure, so I have to create a different vector of value. And so I'm going to solve scalability. But scalability has a cost of, I either sacrifice security or decentralization, because I can only solve two parts of the blockchain, so blockchain trilemma. So if I sacrifice security, let's use Solana and a bunch of those, then eventually that's going to zero, because there's no way that something that was insecure could be built on for humanity to thrive in the future. So that means all of the entrepreneurs building on top of them and the chain itself must fail eventually because of the lack of security. Pretty, I think, fairly easy to see those use cases. And again, when I see those use cases, it surprises me how many people get caught up in these scams, right? Because it's really easy to see from the fundamentals. But now let's use the other one, which is harder to see. So instead of sacrificing security, I'm going to sacrifice a decentralization. I'm going to centralize. And for a while, that could look secure. That could look like, oh, okay, this is new tech. This is faster. This is, I can build smart contracts on it. There's a whole bunch of things, but I would underestimate the centralization function of that blockchain. And then, and because even if just the economic rationale alone, somebody has to pay for the blockchain. Somebody has to pay for that extra cost of the blockchain. So the economic rationale alone says a database is way cheaper option for centralization. So why would anybody use, and who's going to pay for a centralized blockchain where rules can change over time that costs more, that accrete more power to the kind of the insiders of the blockchain, and the only people that would use it long term are the insiders of the blockchain and the people who had tried to build value on top of it and are trying to find a way like out of that blockchain, because their company too rests on top of that centralizing function. So over the long term, they all have to go to zero, because just the economic rationale alone, there is no way, and this is a guarantee. There is no way that Amazon and Google are going to move their entire companies on top of somebody else's centralized blockchain. Right? It's ludicrous. So especially now that on top of a decentralized secure design, now functionality is coming that solves all of those problems and scalability in a different way without sacrificing the base layer. And I can understand, but I can understand when, like, now you take VCs, you take the entire stack of money, um, pension funds that are trying to create enough yield to stay solvent in a system where they are not solvent, and they have to take higher and higher risks, and they are probably not doing the work that we just talked about, and they're seeing something growing that has to have either insecurity or centralization, and they think, I need to be on that ride, and they pump more money into the ride without understanding the risks, because they couldn't invest. VCs couldn't invest in Bitcoin. There was no money to be able to take to be able to invest in Bitcoin, because there's no layer 2 to be able to build the new ecosystems on top of it at that time. So being locked out of Bitcoin and having so much money trying to create yield, you'd be susceptible to anybody who would tell you I could create the new Bitcoin. It's just human nature. So that's what's happened over and over and over again, and I suspect it's going to continue to happen. But it doesn't matter. I don't even think about it really. I don't think about it for myself. I think about it where I'm going to build and spend my time.
Yeah, I think FTX is the elephant in the room there. I think just in terms of people chasing yield, very smart investors even. You've made the point that solving layer 1 for decentralization and security is just paramount. It's a game changer for humanity. We've kind of covered, though, how much it's done for Bitcoin in terms of helping it fend off that 10,000x order of magnitude of strength against it in the early days, and that notion. The angle I want to go in here, though, is how does the interaction of money and law change over time?
Yeah, money is superordinate to laws. Those with money change laws or lobby to change laws because they have money. And so if you have manipulation of money, then you have manipulation of laws too. And this should be easy to see throughout the world. If you just do a logical look back and you say where money is most broken, those people, if you didn't believe what I just said, then where money is most broken, people should have the strongest rule of law. But it's exactly the opposite. And so rule of law comes from sound money. And if you don't have sound money, you don't have rule of law eventually. And so there's a delusion that people are stuck inside a system that they believe is based on the rule, or will always be based on the rule of law, when those laws are changing over and over and over to be able to protect the rich, to be able to protect that and society, and people at the bottom of that stack, people the poorest, don't have any say in the law. They don't have any. They don't have any way to defend themselves in that law, and so that's why money is always superordinate to laws. If you don't have sound money, eventually you don't have sound laws.
Right, and it seems like we're going through a process where our laws are being degraded. Here, where we've had maybe the soundest money fiat is known over the last 50 years. I want to read a few quick questions from your piece that you asked rhetorically. How could decentralized finance occur on a centrally controlled blockchain? How would Web3's promise be any different than today's monopoly power and technology if it was built on a base layer that was more costly and controlled by very few? What is the long-term value of a digital copy or an NFT of something connected to a blockchain that fails? If a lower cost through layer 2 and 3 and decentralized alternative existed that enabled gaming and virtual reality companies to control their own destiny rather than risk their future on a centrally controlled blockchain, what would these entrepreneurs choose? Wouldn't it be more likely that this new protocol, instead of a centrally controlled one, formed the foundation of the metaverse? All the while, entrepreneurs building to those blockchains, the general public and regulators may be unaware of the long-term nature of the vulnerability. Worse still, capital and large holders of the various altcoins schemes could be willing or unwilling participants in a perverse incentive scheme where they get rich or get out just in time at the unknowing public's expense. Charlie Munger's famous quote, "Show me All right. Show me an incentive and I'll show you an outcome. I do want to change a bit here to energy. And I'm very curious about your take on how energy is connected to ideas and our ability to create ideas.
Yeah, so at the top, it's all about energy. On Preston's show, I talked a little bit about, if you think about throughout time, what we are, what us as society is, and where we're going, is really about energy, storage, and compute. And great changes to our society, was where any one of those increased a lot, right? And gave us more power. So as we found higher forms of energy, moving from fire to coal, right? Or from coal to oil, that would be a boost to productivity for the nations that were first there. That fair?
Yep.
Storage, when printing press took our limited storage, so and maybe connect it, we have limited energy storage and compute. So we use external energy storage and compute to build our societies. And so our limited storage in our brains meant, well, for a long time, we would have to tell stories to our future generations because we didn't write things down. And those stories and the forms of how we told those stories carried on generations, and they had misinformation in them. And so people had to learn them over and over and over again. Then we developed a way to write so we could save our stories. Then we do storage. Then we developed a printing press that could reduce the cost of those stories and open up those stories to everybody. And that meant everybody could be a contributor and compute against that contribution and see what we thought before and make changes against that. So that storage and compute would be together, because now you're optimizing all of those minds on that same data and creating more and more storage and compute because of that. And we aggregated society around that. And we aggregated society around to make that happen. We centralized energy and we centralized cities. And why we did that is because where you had more energy storage and compute, you had more ideas, and we live on top of those ideas, and that is human progress. So that the faster that moves, so the biggest cities had the most ideas and more, and it created a more powerful. More people wanted to come out from the farms and live in the cities because there was better way of life, and that required more centralization of food and energy to be able to make that work, and continue. And where you had a break in something, like if you had misinformation and money that connected that whole thing, where let's just say a big city with broken money, you don't have any compute function. Nobody trusts each other. The trust layer is gone. And so the supercomputer that is us breaks down. So these big things throughout time, so that's always happened, is we're searching for ever higher forms of energy, storage, and compute. And we are a rung in the ladder searching for that. And now we're moving that rung in the ladder to computers that have storage and computers and terabytes data and compute that is bypassing our own ability to do that, as we use that tool to make our lives better. And the output function of all of that should be making our lives better, as the productivity gains from all of that flow to us from the free market in the form of lower prices. It should constantly reduce prices as we gain more. Just like if you you built a road before with just your hands, and then you got a shovel, you could build a road faster and you could save your time. And then you got a backhoe and you could build the road faster and you could save more time. That time savings is what we're talking about in what should be happening in society as we use this function, as we naturally use this function and solve problems for us in society. And what's happening instead of that is we're making prices go up against that. And so that has to concentrate all of that productivity gains, all of those productivity gains that should be coming through lower prices. It must concentrate those productivity gains in the hands of few who make decisions for all of us. And it must, as a byproduct of that, lower living standards, because those people could never predict all of the ideas like we talked about before.
Right.
So that's how that's connected. It's always been connected. These great changes that we see throughout society, these revolutions, are really around but massive changes to society are really around one of those functions, one or two of those functions, increasing, like the printing press, which gave rise to a scientific revolution on top of that, or an energy change gave rise to more energy into that storage and compute that gave rise to that. That's the and that's what's happening today. And they're feeding back on each other faster and faster and faster. And if you ask the question where Bitcoin fits into this and why this is really important, is that same structure that we required cities to be able to centralize energy, and that meant the energy distribution company had to price energy for the peak rates of the city for that function, and they had to turn off energy that didn't work. It had to be a centralizing function, as one example. Meant you couldn't develop energy where there wasn't a city, right? It didn't work. There was no economic reinforcement. And so a couple of things are happening now as we do more information exchange or storage and compute, like we're doing right now. And this could touch millions of people over time, forever. This one part, it could change a whole bunch of minds. This now we can go to a satellite uplink. We don't need a centralized server to do this, or a telco to do this. We can go up to a satellite link through Starlink, say. We could do this anywhere in the world. We could chase energy anywhere in the world where energy was most efficient. And we could get the same energy storage and compute anywhere in the world without this centralization of that function. So what that means is that whole process actually speeds up, and it speeds up faster and faster and faster, because it's the rate limiting function of the city's centralized design around energy. And then the energy that they would choose for that city, rate limited by where that energy was and what that looked like, it's no longer there. So now and that's going to take a long time to play out, but it means you could be anywhere in the world, anywhere, and have effectively the same access to the world.
Right.
You don't need the city anymore.
Yeah, I left the city. Feels good. And I used to be someone who always wanted to be in the city. This idea of energy storage and compute is really really fascinating to me. It's really helping me think through this notion of, I think about, humanity's trying to harness energy, harness information, harness ideas, and I thought of that maybe, is that some sort of collective hive mind? But the way you're explaining it is like we sort of have hive storage, but we can all interact and take from that storage and make our own decisions and our own computations. What else?
And what's so interesting about it is we think we have always thought the same thing. And we think we always had this information once we have new information, but our minds change completely. And then we forget other people don't have this information yet. And so the interesting thing about this connection is the change that happens from these conversations in our own minds, and then we build new ideas on top of those ideas, and the best ones win. Right? That's what our society looks like, and the ones that don't, the ones that don't win out over time fail.
Right. And there seems to be a benefit if we get to the better or the greater ideas sooner than later.
For
and
sure.
if more of us take up the idea than not, sooner, I guess, because all the bad ideas should fail. But what I can't help to think about though is, I mean, with Bitcoin, we talk a lot about energy, and we don't talk enough maybe about the energy that the legacy system uses. And we talk about layers and protocols, but one way to look at it maybe is, when you go to buy that cup of coffee, all the layers of commerce and energy deployment, whether that's the banking companies, the credit card companies, the central banks, all the way to the military, and all the energy used in that stack. And that helps me think then, if Bitcoin just not so much takes that energy, but allows that energy to dissipate and be redirected towards better things, better ideas, how much progress that will bring to humanity.
Yeah, and this is one of the hardest things for people to see, because they're measuring it from inside a system. And if you looked at, it's hard to believe, for me, it's hard to believe even people say this, but they say productivity is going down, right? There's not as much productivity. And you hear economists say this all the time. And it's because they're measuring productivity through a $400 trillion of debt that's expanding exponentially on the overall productivity. And the productivity is reducing things to free. And they have no way of measuring it besides, as that thing is now free, so it doesn't show up in a GDP calculation, I need to print more money to offset it to keep the debt solvent. Which is like, look or see the chatbots, see see all of the things. How could you say productivity isn't increasing in the world today when it's all in front of us all day, and what we're doing right now? Like, think about what we're doing right now and touching them, how many people it could touch versus what it would have taken to create this productivity and that supercompute 20 years ago, and how many people it could touch. The cost of is fallen to the floor. It costs nothing. It's to do what we're doing now, versus before we would have had to get on the planes, we would have had to call a conference together, we would have had to sell newspapers about all of these ideas. People would have read those newspapers through the bias of that, and they wouldn't have seen this conversation real time, be able to contribute to it as well in the comments and what they're doing. And how can you look at this and say productivity is declining? It's not declining, it's speeding up. And that speeding up is the cause for the exponential debt increase, because that productivity, you can't pay back the debt. And so that productivity, it by increasing the debt and keeping everybody working uselessly against something that's driving the other way, driving prices up, keeps us all on this perpetual motion machine that says we can grow forever on a finite planet by manipulating money. That is climate change. The entire thing that we just described is climate change. It's unsolvable. And when you said it was a climate change or environmental damage or anything else, I know that's a buzzword, but that thing, that perpetual motion machine that presupposes that we should work more by paying us less forever, against technology that's taking those jobs. Wouldn't you just want to use the technology to make your life better, so the prices fell as the technology did the work, instead of transferring all of that power to a couple people who own the technology? Doesn't that make more sense?
Yeah, a lot more sense. Thinking about general purpose technology and finding the signal in a noisy world, can AI be good or bad? Can it be benevolent? And one question I have about it is, like, what if like AI was written to write out excellence? You know, like what would that do to human behavior?
Well, again, you're in a system measuring a system by the system, and so let's just follow two thoughts on where AI is right now. For people to look at the chatbot or the photos or anything else, and how realistic this is, you could create. There's some people that would say we have we have general intelligence coming in 2 years. It's right before us right now. And then there's another group of people that say this is just machine learning and it's never going to do anything besides what it does. And both those camps are wildly missing what's happening. Both. Because it doesn't actually matter. What matters is the trend. And those camps are trying to measure the light switch. When one day AI is going to be more intelligent than all of humanity. And they're fear mongering about the light switch. Right. The trend all the way around along that trend, I'll bet you over 99% of the population that is looking at OpenAI right now and playing with it, 99% of the population that own businesses are investigating right now, how do I use this to reduce my labor, to make my business better? And as they do that, they'll make the algorithms better as a byproduct, and they'll reduce the labor component. And then there's a smaller percentage of people that are saying, all of those businesses are designed on a different function and they were built on a different world. And what if I use this technology totally different and create a different value from zero? And I didn't have any employees, and I did this. And could I create value to not just save all my employee costs or reduce that cost? How could I create new value for society? So that's what typically happens on technology like this. And you have a whole bunch of new ideas spurring off of this that create new value that we never saw before, because there was no way to create that value in the old system that cost too much. And so that game is being played is a game, no matter what way you look at it, is a way for less jobs, more efficiency. Prices should fall. But as the prices fall because of that, because people think they need the jobs, they'll vote for more manipulation of money to make their income less in real time to save the job instead of falling. So that's what's happening right now. But and all of these things are, you look at the trends rather than the light switch moment, and you can see what's happening. I wrote this in the book, but I'm convinced that error correction is intelligence. That's what we do. And if we make more errors, when you learn to walk or talk, making a lot of errors, and you correct them over time, and you learn to walk and then run and then talk. And if you make a bunch of errors in your business, if you keep making the same error over and over and you don't learn, then you keep failing over and over. And if you make errors and you go, I'm not going to do that one again, you learn faster. That's what computers are doing too. They're just aggregating all of this and data, and early on it's error correction and an error correction at scale, and in time they do a bunch of this better than we do.
Right. Along those lines, can the Oracle problem ever be solved in a decentralized fashion?
Yeah, so that's what Bitcoin does, right? The Oracle problem is, and Gigi does such a good job of this, but if you just look at the how the consensus mechanism works in Bitcoin, and how physics work, the time, the relativity of time isn't the same in all around the world, and the further away you could go to the minute differences in time. but we measure our time as all the same. We measure it locally. It, Bitcoin solves that problem. And so the Oracle problem, that's actually why it's so unique. That and the difficulty algorithm and it's you can't create it again. It's a once and forever type of discovery or invention, because you can't solve that. You can't resolve that problem. It's a solved problem that we never were able to access before. We had to introduce the Oracle problem.
Yeah, I love how we're distilling a lot of signal here to kind of cut through what's just a very difficult environment for people to make judgments, or even for people who are thinking critically.
But if
I was thinking,
but let's just carry that forward. If you just said you'd always lived in this system, you were looking back on history books that reinforced what that system looked, and all of that knowledge that came before you, you'd be looking to error correct off previous mistakes, and something new, and that means that new things that challenge that status quo, right? At that level, at that type of level, because that is a universal level on top of everything. If what we're saying is true, if you go through that and Bitcoin is that type of discovery, it's a staggering discovery that changes everything else. But those don't come around very often. And we're living in a system that is a culmination of all of this. And it would be really easy in that system to not look at the new, to not give it the amount of time that it needs to be able to understand it at that level. And I think actually that's what the rabbit hole is. I think what ends up happening is for people that have understood what this looks like, and it's why it looks like a religion for people that understand, because it changes everything. And you almost sound like a crazy person to somebody who hasn't seen it, because they're still stuck in a different system. And and now if you intuit remember, data is the legacy of existing models. You have to intuit what will happen in new models. So when you're creating something new, you have no data of the new. You have to predict human action out of what will happen. And it doesn't carry all of the information that the old model has. In fact, most of the information of the way the old model has worked prohibits people from seeing how something would work in the new. It's why creative destruction works, because they're not in the old model. They can build something new that delivers value differently, and the old model doesn't have a way to solve that from that model. And so that model, though, you have to predict behavior. You have to intuit what's going to happen. You have to understand, okay, if this happens, and you can't think in just first order consequences. You have to think in second, third, fourth, fifth order consequences of some of those decisions. And then what will that do to this? What will that do to this? I find that like wildly intellectually stimulating, because you're constantly checking in on your own biases, what might happen here. And what I see, what I understand when I say meet people where they are, is where they're measuring this, they're carrying their baggage mostly. If they're doing the work on Bitcoin, most people are carrying their baggage from the old system into the new system and thinking that that's how it's going to work in the new system. We should probably, if we're doing this, we should probably talk about one of those examples that I see all the time. Right. And one of those examples that I see all the time is these systems work entirely differently, right? 180. In one system, you buy a house because the debt that you're going to pay back on the house is going to be cheaper over time, and you're going to pay it back, and the house rises a bit because the money is manipulated, and the money becomes cheaper over time, and you get raises against that money over time, so you pay back in cheaper dollars, and the house rises. In the other system, the house falls over time to its utility value. Now, measured in one system, in the fiat system, the house will keep rising. But measured against Bitcoin, the house will fall to its utility value. And now, what do loans look like in the new system versus the old system? So we know in the system we live in, there's $400 trillion of loans that can't be paid back. And that gets worse and worse. And there's going to have to be more and more manipulation to pretend that they can be paid back. And so what about in the new system? What happens to the loans? Well, if prices fall, then a loan gets more expensive in real terms. So that means no matter who holds the loan, if you take a bunch of leverage in that and you're the counterparty and prices fall, then the business that's going to pay you back won't be able to pay you back, and you're going to lose your money. Right? And if you're the business, then you're going to lose your business to the person who holds the loan. But what that whole process means is we consider, because it's always been, debt is required to run a productive economy, and debt isn't required to produce a productive economy. And because we think debt is required for a productive economy, we think inflation is required for a productive economy. Because it's always been the way we've constructed economies. But so what you're saying at the bottom of that statement is the only way we can trade with each other all over the world is if there's theft in money. Right? It's completely illogical. It doesn't, but it is the system we live in today. So that a lot of people say, okay, as we move over to Bitcoin, and if you only understood the base layer of Bitcoin, you didn't understand the payment layer and everything else, you might think, okay, all of the rich people in Bitcoin are going to now own the world, and it's going to look exactly the same as it did under this system with new rulers. But that's because you haven't done the work and understanding how Bitcoin is going to reprice the entire debt. It's going to remove the entire stack, most of that stack. And whether it does it through inflation or deflation doesn't matter. It's going to, and the new model on top of Bitcoin, because the velocity is in the technology itself, you can do unlimited trade all over the world in the technology instead of having a debt instrument to try to push out velocity. Then what that means is prices continue to fall against Bitcoin forever. It would probably happen anyways, even if it was a debt industry, even if it was just Bitcoin base layer, because what would happen is human fear and greed would try to build models on top of it, just like FTX, and then have the counterparty risk wipe them out over and over again, eventually getting people to Bitcoin. But this is going to happen faster because you have a payment layer on top that's going to function as velocity money. So in Bitcoin, prices will fall forever.
Right. I guess turning more towards a Bitcoin economy or a Bitcoin standard, Bitcoin Ali from Twitter was hoping you'd expand a little bit on leveraging Bitcoin and how debt is not required for velocity.
Yeah, so that's what I was just saying. So we live in a world where there's a belief by mainstream economists that because you couldn't trade gold at the rate gold would have to move around the world, right? Especially in a digital world where your labor all over the world can do what we're doing in an instant. And so that had to be centralized. And as soon as something was centralized, it built a function on top of it, an instrument on top of it that gave rise to incentives, our incentives. And that meant, let's say a bank gave on top of that, said, okay, well, I'm going to hold your gold 1 for 1, and you come back here and vault and tell me when you need it. Well, they knew you didn't need it all the time, so they started leveraging it 2 to 1, more and more. And so that leverage, and the more leverage they gave you, more leverage they took risk on. You you paid them for increasing that risk, and they paid you a small interest rate on that carry. So if they took more leverage, they could give you a higher interest rate. And because of our short-term needs, we wouldn't see that risk, and we would race to the ones that gave us the highest interest rate. And that would create a market function that would create, you wouldn't see it until everybody wanted their gold back at the same time. And you'd have mass failings of these banks based on that trade. And then as that banking structure failed, because the banking was a critical structure for economy, the government couldn't allow that to happen. So they would socialize the losses, and they move and move the debt up the level to the government from that. And so that's just kind of what's happened throughout time, largely because of that incentive structure. And then now and over time, a belief structure that okay, we're going to increase the velocity of money by jamming this debt and make the economy grow, so more people will trade more, and we can drive the economy that way. And then we can, once it overheats too much, we can contract it a bit, and then we have and so what you really have is an entire system based on manipulation of money that acts like a free market function that we live on top with the entire credit-based system. Remember, if we talk about what just happened at FTX and the counterparty risk in the entire system is 10,000 times bigger, and it's 10,000 times bigger than the counterparty risk at FTX, and it looks exactly the same. The only difference is the belief that somebody's going to bail out the counterparty. And that eventually is going to fail miserably. And Bitcoin doesn't have that counterparty risk. And so you can trade that velocity of money. That velocity of money that has been embedded in the code means you don't have to rebuild the same debt structures to try to do that. And that productivity, then that means the productivity gains from technology, or what we do trying to solve problems, continue to reduce prices forever as we solve those problems, because you can't manipulate that.
Right. Tremendous. I do want to ask another question from another person on Twitter, Ultra Toxic. Jeff, do you think Satoshi is good with the current state of affairs overall? And what do you think Satoshi is concerned about or happy about today?
I can't know that, but here's what here's why I love what Satoshi did in being pseudonymous, and we don't know. And what we do as people is we paint a hero in somebody else, and then what we think they would do is what we would talk, and we change what they would do over time. And that hero is what hero or villain is what is what we tell ourselves, a story of what that looks. It's so easy to, instead of look at systems, look at people, and we paint these ideologues of what they would do. Bitcoin takes that away, and Satoshi, in his design and being pseudonymous, takes that away and puts all of that power in all of us. And so it doesn't actually matter what he intended. It matters what the system looks like today, and it's decentralized and secure. And now you have a second layer building on top of it. That because of this decentralization and security, and he may have, or they, or whoever that is, may have never even seen the second layer and what would happen on top of it once that was out in the open and able to be built on to provide this, and seeing it in a different way. Maybe that was seen, maybe it wasn't seen, but it actually doesn't matter anyways, because we should, as society, move forward, and we should and there's going to be lots of mistakes on top of this layer. There's going to be a lot of companies that are going to start and fail and give rise to the new companies that said, they did that wrong. I'm going to try it this way. That's going to happen over and over and over. But in the end, it's going to be on a system that you can't manipulate, and that value, as a result of that, is going to accrue to all of us.
Amazing. But when you said earlier, we talked about the money and how that's a vector, and it would just really just kind of bother me on some sort of moral level if Satoshi was alive and had himself or a family to take care of and needed the money, and for whatever reason, out of altruism or safety, security, privacy, whatever reason, never touched and didn't create a stack we don't know about that has moved.
Yeah.
And for the sake of humanity and benefiting humanity, can't touch this value they've created, and has to sit and watch, but maybe has needs in their own life that can't be met. And I think, there's nothing wrong with creating value and then using that value to benefit yourself. And it just would bother me.
Yeah, and again, that's and I think because you see this as how much value this brings to humanity, and you fully understand what that will look like in time, then you think about you. I think what you're saying is this: the people that impact us most, we want to see win. That's I think that's, and I think that's that's a fair thing to say, but we can't know, and I don't think and if he, her, them, if it hadn't looked like that, it might not. It'd be hard to see that it made it this far.
Right. Another Twitter person, Severus, Severus, wanted to ask you if you saw a difference between Bitcoin purchase using KYC and those that weren't KYC'd in terms of a future possible seizure from governments.
I want to be careful that it's so obviously if you're non KYC, that's better. I think as this rolls out, I think that there's going to be a whole bunch of different countries and different that are going to try to lock this out or lock you out from it or tax you or try to take this back. And even if you were KYC and you could remember 12 words and get on a plane and take all your wealth to somewhere else, then they have to chase you. And there's going to be lots of safe havens in the world as they try to chase you. And if you try to think about the rest of your wealth, how do you take your houses and everything else from on that same plane? And most of the rest of your wealth is locked into a country. As that manipulation is going to, I don't see the risk I don't see the risk in Bitcoin because of the very nature of that. You hold your own keys, or at least in self custody, that they have to chase you, and there's going to be plenty of countries that are going to be offering you asylum and safe havens because they're going to want to create that Bitcoin economy.
Right, that makes sense. In this macro environment, do you think we're guaranteed a long bear market?
I think that the system we live in, that's 10,000 times bigger than Bitcoin, is failing, and that failure could take a number of different forms. And when it won't fail overnight, it has a network effect. But 88% of global trade is in US dollars, and so as they tighten, that means all of the debt repayable in US dollars all around the world is now more insolvent, and people are racing for more US dollars, and it causes a collapse over and over and over of other countries, and then eventually the US. But the US could turn around. Let's imagine you wanted to tighten to a point and then move back in and loosen, then a bunch of the same nations that were desperate for cash would accept those terms, and you would get away with it again. So this is going to play out for some time. The US dollar isn't going anywhere, I don't think, in the short term. But other countries are going to face a lot of pain. I would say the US is going to face pain as well. And what would you just saw? I think it was yesterday or the day before. $65 trillion is missing in debt that the Bank of International Settlements didn't know existed until just recently. So how does that happen? And so when you have manipulation of money and you have all these incentives around manipulation of money, then you can expect more of that to happen all over the place. Well, $65 trillion is a big number. And if it's missing and every other asset is tied to it being solvent, then you can imagine what the price of every other asset in the world is actually worth if it's not solvent. So these are, there is going to be eventually massive easing, because without massive easing, the entire system is going, the same credit that is the system that you think is solvent all fails all over the world. And that's a system that you're measuring every other asset price by. So at some point, there's going to be a lot more manipulation of money or out of the system. Bitcoin is that safe harbor away from that. Again, it's repricing that entire system over time, and it's a bridge. The more important thing is, would you want to live in a world based on kind of deception, theft, fraud? Is that the way that what would you teach your kids in that world if that's the way that society was ordered, because money was ordered that way and it was required to save the system? If that's a system you want to live in, then we have me and whoever wants to live in that system have a fundamental disagreement on how the system I want to live in the world. That's okay, but that's the fundamental disagreement. I want to live in a system based on truth, and I'm going to spend my time building onto the new system with people that want to build that system. And if there's enough of those people that want to build that new system, that's the way the world will move.
Right. That's amazing. So in that light, is Bitcoin more impactful than the internet?
Yes. It's not, you can't see it today. But it is much more impactful than it will be much more impactful than the internet. In fact, it's rebuilding a new peer-to-peer internet that puts us all as equals, and we create value. And the more value we create, the more prices fall for all of us on that system. And it's an equalizer around nations. And so now you're not, as this expands, it doesn't matter where you're born to be able to plug into a system that effectively gets its life from enslaving other people. You are plugged into a global network of people contributing ideas that has benefit to you. So it's a lot bigger, but it's early.
Yeah. Wow. My final question to you, and it is from Bitcoin, another one from Bitcoin Ali on Twitter. Any tips for remaining patient and thoughtful as we try to meet others where they are?
So I laugh because I got to meet Bitcoin Ali in Scotland, and she's fantastic. And then I saw, and I've said that often, because when you understand Bitcoin, it's really easy to think everybody else understands Bitcoin too, and they must be malicious actors because they don't understand Bitcoin, or that why can't they get it? And then some of those same people take pot shots at people who understand Bitcoin, and then there's a defense mechanism for the people in Bitcoin. And so I saw Bitcoin Ali playing that game with somebody who is just doing that on Twitter, and I appreciate it, but it comes with the territory. What I realized is, you can just be you, right? You can, when what somebody says about you doesn't say something about you unless you make it about you. What it says is something about them. And so how do you meet people where they are? She's a beautiful person. Just be her, right? That's how you do that, and you'll have way more impact than dealing with the people that are really trying to throw stones to make a point with no other fix, with no potential fix. They haven't. If you've seen the what is it, the poem or whatever, about the inside the ring, the person inside the ring. It's awesome, but you want to be the person. You want to be the person changing the world rather than the person throwing stones at the people changing the world. If you don't like the world you see, be the person. Be the person you want to see.
Yeah. Well, I told my wife who's coming on the show tonight. She was super excited. She says, "Great that we finally can get an adult in the room." Someone.
So and here's the thing. I don't like that at all. And here's why I don't like that, because so many of the other people in Bitcoin have made me better, right? That error correction that I see from a whole bunch of other people, we just all have our own way, right? We just have our, and I can't be like some other people, and they shouldn't be like me. I can only be me. But a lot of those other people, all of these different ideas in their own way are actually making me better too. So I love, like, for me, I don't think about it that way. I'm me.
I hear you. I think that just some of us think of that you're a really respectable vehicle delivery system for these ideas.
well, do put it this. Here's a way to look at that in a broader way. Every single one of us on the planet, most of us on this planet, have something in us that is just exceptional, and something in us that is not so good.
Right.
And what we normally want to do is we want to tear people down for the thing that they're not very good at. And when you actually celebrate the things that people are really good at, they'll celebrate them in you too. It's just way easier. So when I think about this community, and I think about all of what a decentralized network would look like, and all of the different brilliant minds coming at it in their own way and their own experiences, it's exactly what it should look like, and it's beautiful.
Yeah, I think she said something like, he's like having a Bitcoin godfather. So as always, Jeff, this has been tremendous. I've enjoyed this immensely. I'll leave it to you for any parting words and to let people know where they can find your work.
Yeah, no, just it's tremendous for me too. The only thing I would say is, if people wanted to find me, best is Jeff Booth on Twitter. If people are looking at starting a Bitcoin business, have an idea of starting a Bitcoin business, they could send something to my email at egodeath or egodeath capital. But I get more value out of this community than I give to this community, and I'm just incredibly honored, humbled to be a part of it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. It's humbling to get to speak with you, and I enjoy your contributions immensely. Thank you so much, Jeff.
Right back at you, my friend.
Thank you so much for checking out this show. Again, make sure that you're subscribed so that you don't miss out on any new content. I'd love to hear your feedback. Leave a comment or send me an email at cedricyoungelman@gmail.com. Let me know what you think and if you have guest suggestions. I want to thank Jeff Booth for taking the time to come on the Bitcoin Matrix podcast. I also want to thank our sponsors, River Financial, CoinKite, and CrowdHealth, for powering the show. Their support goes a long way to helping me get the show done. Alex Vetsky Bitstein, Joe Consorti, Lawrence Lepard, and Susie BDDS are all up next. Stay humble, stack sats, and be laser focused out there. This is Cedric. Peace.